Why would you say that, Roger? What does God want for us more than anything? A relationship, peace. Worded a little bit different. Where does God want us to be more than anything? Heaven. Right? Does He want us to be satisfied with earth? No, He wants us to long to be with Him in heaven. Relationship. Be at peace. So therefore, that's why you said what you said, is He cares for us, so He allows us to suffer, to reconnect. Whoever said that earlier, to reconnect to Him. We talked about last week about parents or grandparents. What makes you feel better? When you tell your kid, get over here and hug me. Get over here and tell me that you love me. Or when you come home from work in the afternoons and you've had a rough day, and I'm thinking about myself here, and you open up that door and you've got two blonde-headed kids come to you and grab you. Daddy, how was work today? Did you have a good day? I love you. I'd hope I'd rather come home with a bad attitude and say, get over here and quit watching TV and tell me you love me. Right? You know the answer to that. So what does God want? He wants us to cry, humbly go to Him, and want Him, right? Want Him to help us. So this morning, as we watch Brother Dan's video this morning, I want you to look at things. If you can read this up here this morning, the blame game from Psalms 13, 1 and 2. We question, when we suffer, we question our goodness. Well, what have I done? You know, did I sin? What did I do to deserve this suffering? Or we question, where's God at? You know, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm living the life that I think's right. Why am I suffering when somebody else that's not a child of God's seems like everything's going their way? Watch for these two things as we watch the video this morning.
When he was a boy, he got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to deliver newspapers. As he got older, he drove a truck, picked fruit, and hauled ice when he wasn't playing football. His name was Marion Michael. He was such a good athlete, he was awarded an athletic scholarship by the University of Southern California, USC. Unfortunately, he broke an ankle in his second year and stepped away from the sport. You and I know him because his 6'4" frame filled the big screen with more than 200 films to his credit. He died from complications due to cancer at the age of 72. He was an American icon, the Duke, John Wayne. That's right, Marion Michael Morrison changed his name to John Wayne. There are a lot of people in the Bible whose names were changed. Abram to Abraham, father of multitudes. Sarai to Sarah, princess, I like that. Simon Peter to the rock. And of course, Saul to Paul. Today, as we stand in a cemetery, the example of a name change that comes to my mind is a lady in the Old Testament, Naomi. Where she lived, the local economy was awful, and her family was forced to pack up their home in Bethlehem and move to a foreign country, starting all over. That's where life added insult to injury. First, her husband of many years passed away. We don't know why. Did he get sick? Was there an accident? We just don't know. The Bible simply says Naomi's husband died, and she was left. Then both of her sons died. The Grim Reaper took away every member of her immediate family. She was left with 2 daughters-in-law, and one of them left her to fend for herself. Well, finally, she returned home to Bethlehem and said to her friends, "Don't call me Naomi. That name means pleasant. Call me Mara, bitter." And she explained, "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." Ruth 1, verse 20. The years had been unkind, and her life had been scarred with sadness. How did she feel? Bitter. Who did she blame? God. The Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Ouch. That gets pretty close to home. Like Naomi, most all of us have been disappointed with life. Difficulties, disabilities, damages, divorce, disease, death, they can leave us in need of repair, in a state of despair, feeling disturbed and perturbed, looking for someone to blame. I mean, we're in pain, and someone is to blame, right? What we usually do is point our thoughts in one of 2 directions. We either blame ourselves or we blame God. We ask, what have I done to deserve this? What we're really saying is, what's wrong with me? Or, what's going on? What's wrong with God? Think about those 2 questions a little bit more. First, when we hurt, we're tempted to blame ourselves and question our own goodness. We equate suffering with sin. Go back to the book of Job. That man lost everything he had. He lost every one of his children in the same natural disaster. Then of all things, he lost his health. Listen to what his friend Eliphaz said. "Who that was innocent ever perished? I have seen those who plow or plant iniquity sow or reap trouble." Let me paraphrase that. When did good people ever have bad things happen to them? You're having trouble, Job, because you've transgressed. You're suffering because you're a sinner. Listen to what his friend Bildad said. Does God pervert justice? If your children have sinned against him, he has delivered them into the hand of their transgression. If you'll seek God and plead with the Almighty for mercy, he will restore your rightful habitation. Job 8:36. Man, that was outright cold. Your children died because they weren't living right. And if you'd start living right, stuff like this wouldn't happen. Listen to what his friend Zophar said. "Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves." Job 11:6. Man, who needs friends like that? You may be hurting, but it's not half as much as what you deserve. If you suffer, you've sinned. That's what they were thinking. Remember how the apostles reacted to a man born blind? They asked Jesus, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" John 9, verse 2. If you suffer, you must have sinned, but that's not always true. Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. Hebrews 5, verse 8. Our Lord suffered, but he never sinned. Sometimes we suffer as the consequence of something we've done, and to that extent, we are culpable. But going through bad times doesn't mean automatically we've done bad things. We shouldn't be too quick to blame ourselves. But instead of blaming self, When they suffer, some blame God and question God's goodness. For example, grief causes some to doubt God's existence. God, are you really there? In the words of Psalms 42, verse 10, others are asking, where is your God? And they don't know how to answer. And then grief has caused others to doubt God's benevolence. God, do you really care? With David, they want to know, how long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? Psalms 13, verses 1 and 2. If God is there, why doesn't he do something to help me? If he doesn't do something, is he really there? Does he really care? That's the idea. Well, I've got a better idea. David wrote, you have tried my heart. You have visited me by night. You have tested me. I have purposed that my mouth will not transgress. Psalm 17, verse 3. Paraphrased. God has put me to a test and allowed stuff to happen, but I'm not going to say anything bad about him. The rest of that psalm gives us some ideas on how to think that same way. We'll look at those a little bit later on. But right now let's be encouraged by our memory verse again. Hebrews 12, verse 11. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who've been trained by it. Isn't that a great passage? Isn't that a great thought? Things are going to get better. Let your study leader help you with that a little more, and we'll see you one more time before we close our study.
So what two things do we blame when we suffer? What two areas? We blame ourselves, right? We blame on ourselves. What do we say? What have I done? We equate the suffering with sin, right? Like Job and his friends, they just knew Job had done something, right? The apostles, right? What has this man done, or what has his family done to cause him to be blind, right? What else? If it's not that, what is it? We blame God. The interesting thing, I like the verse he brought up, Hebrews 5:8. Who suffered? Who did he say suffered? Jesus, right? We know Jesus didn't sin. So if that's true, then if sin is equal to suffering, then why didn't, right? Jesus didn't sin. So he shouldn't have suffered, and we know why, right? We know why he suffered. He chose to suffer for our sins. And then God's existence. In our study, harder questions, what do each of the following suggest as they relate to God in those times that we hurt? Number one, God is everywhere. What does that suggest? If God is everywhere, what does that suggest if we're hurting? He's available. Because He's everywhere, right? If God is everywhere, when we hurt, He's available. If He's everywhere, does He see everything? Does He know everything? Does that make you feel comfortable that when you're hurting, you're going to your Creator that knows everything, that sees everything? He's available anywhere you're at? How about God has been around forever? What does that mean? What does that mean to you? It's not the first time He's dealt. Do you think anybody suffered as much as you, Kelly? Huh? Do you think, maybe Job? has suffered more than us, right? So it's not the first time. So when we go to our Father in prayer, when we suffer, we know that this is not the first person that's went to Him in prayer, right? That's had the same kind of issues that we're dealing with. He knows how to help us. Write down these verses. Psalms 90, verse 2. And 1 Timothy 1:17. And interesting on God is everywhere. Proverbs 15, verse 3 in your books. If you don't have one, write that down. God keeps watch on the evil and the good. Proverbs 15:3. How about God can do anything? What does that mean to you when you're suffering? He what? He's available. What does it mean to you that your Creator can do anything? He can fix it. He can fix it. He can fix it. He knows how to fix it. Have you ever prayed to God and you knew the answer? So you prayed to Him, let this happen, and it didn't happen? Is it a faith builder when you pray to God and this is what needs to happen, God, help me out, and then you got something even better? He teaches us that you don't know what's best, right? Our Creator knows what's best for us, and He can do anything. How about God wants to help us? What does that mean? What does that mean to you when you're suffering? That your Creator wants to help us. He cares. He wants us to ask, right? He cares about us. He cares about His children. So He's available at all times. He's everywhere. He can do anything. And He wants to, that's exactly my thoughts, yay. Right? That's a good way to sum it up. Very good, yes. Yep, yay. Our Creator can do anything and He can help us. And He cares about us. Yay. Very good. Very good. Was that you, Mom, that said that? If you have a concordance, it said to look up the word help in Psalms and pick one in Psalms that means most to you about suffering. Did anybody write down a verse that wants to read it in Psalms? Did anybody get one? Someone read Psalms 28:7. And someone read Psalms 33:20. Psalms 40:17. But I am poor and needy, yet the Lord thinketh upon me. Thou art my help and my deliverer. Make no tarrying, O my God. I'm poor and I need God. And He's my help and my deliverer. Who's got the other two? Psalms 28:7.
The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusted in Him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart greatly rejoices, and my song I will praise Him.
All right. Psalms 33:20. Psalm 33:20. And then the last one, Psalms 121, 1 through 3. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. our memory verse, Hebrews 12:11. Turn to that. Last week we talked about for the moment. We talked about moment being what? Being what? Right now. Temporal. Right? Temporary. It's going to be quick, right? Does that mean that our pain and suffering could last our lifetime? Do we know some people that suffered their whole life of some kind of pain? But momentary, temporal, right? Even a lifetime is just a moment compared to eternity in heaven, right? This week, we're going to focus on those words, painful rather than pleasant. Our suffering is dreadful, right? And this painful rather than pleasant, this painful in this context is emotional. So when we suffer, it's very emotional. It's an emotional suffering. Write this verse down, or write this chapter down, this passage down. Psalm 17. This is how David had felt about his suffering. And write these notes down, and then you can go back and study that this week. David chose not to blame and say bad things when God allowed him to suffer. In verse 1 through 3. If we follow David's example, verse 4 and 5, he gives us an example to let God talk to you. Spend more time in His Word when you're suffering emotional. You talk to God. Verse 6. Spend more time in prayer. Verse 7 through 14. Trust in God's love for you. And then verse 15, always try to be like God and emulate your Father. So when you need encouragement, emotional, painful, go to Psalm 17 and see what David did. He talked to God. He let God talk to him. He trusted in His love. And then he tried to emulate God. I've got about 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 5 minutes. Good. We've talked about that verse before, right? 1 Corinthians 10:13, right? There's 4 promises in there, right? He won't let us be tempted more than we can allow, right? He gives us a way of escape. Somebody help me with all 4 of them. He gives us a way of escape. Won't let us be tempted more than He's there for us, right, to help us through it. Then there's a 4th one. I wished I could remember that. There's 4 promises in that verse. It's a really good verse. I need to make that note in my Bible where I have it. 1 Corinthians 10:13. If you're going through a trial, God promises, if we believe in His promises, there's 4 promises in that verse. When we're going through a trial, it's not more than we can handle, right? He's going to give us a way of escape. He's there for us. There's one other one. Oh, we can endure it. The 4th one. Last words. We can endure it. Okay? As we close, I think, any other comments for today? I want to read Dan's summary right here to summarize this week's. I thought this was really good on how he summarized this section. Any other thoughts? Well, that's a good point. So Johnny says, not only can we learn from our suffering, how much faith, if I'm going through a suffering time, if I'm going through a trial, a valley, and Kim and Johnny as a brother and sister sees me faithfully going to God in prayer, not blaming God. Well, let's even take it. How faith building was it for Job's friends? Were they negative? Did Job jump on their bandwagon? He kept trying to, right? How faith building is it for our brothers and sisters if we're going through a trial and we never blame God? We always have faith in prayer. So it's faith building, right? Very good, very good. All right, Dan's words here to sum up the chat. The choice is a simple one. When we suffer, we can turn on God and blame Him for not being there, or we can turn to God and claim His care. Let me say that again. We can turn on God and blame Him for not being there, or we can turn to God and claim His care. He allows us to struggle because He knows it can make us stronger. But He is also right there, working in the shadows of providence, helping us get through those struggles. He may not do what we ask. He may not do what we think He should. He may take longer than we wish, but He is there with a heart that deeply cares. Any other comments for today? Next week's our last chapter, and so come with questions and thoughts. And then if we've got some that rolls over, Doyle's going to take all the hard ones the week after. So if you got any hard ones, write them down, hold them over to the next week. Doyle's preparing for those.